Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Peggy Sherman and I'm the Service Associate today. This morning we welcome to our pulpit the Reverend Dr. Leonisa Ardizzone, who has been a science and peace educator for 30 years and was ordained into the Unitarian Universalist ministry in 2019. Currently, she is a visiting professor at Vassar College, the ministerial consultant for the UU Ministry for Earth, an affiliated community minister at the Fourth Universalist Society in New York City, and a core organizer with the Rivers and Mountains Green Faith Circle. She is also the founder of the Peace Education Center of the Hudson Valley, an author, a musician, and a mom.
Good morning. Buongiorno. Buenos dias. It's my joy to be with you this morning. Our call to, there we go. Our call, thank you. I keep forgetting how short I am. Our opening words are from the United Nations Environmental Sabbath Program. We have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten who we are. We have alienated ourselves from the unfolding of the cosmos. We have become estranged from the movements of the earth. We have turned our backs on the cycles of life. We have forgotten who we are. We have sought only our own security. We have exploited simply for our own ends. We have distorted our knowledge. We have abused our power. We have forgotten who we are. Now the land is barren and the waters are poisoned and the air is polluted. We have forgotten who we are. Now the forests are dying and the creatures are disappearing and humans are despairing. We have forgotten who we are. We ask forgiveness. We ask for the gift of remembering. We ask for the strength to change. We have forgotten who we are.
Please join in the chalice lighting with the words shown on your screen or in your order of service. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to support its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community.
Our story this morning is We Are Water Protectors by Carol Lindstrom and illustrated by Michaela Goad. Water is the first medicine, Nokomis told me. We come from water. It nourished us inside our mother's body, as it nourishes us here on Mother Earth. Water is sacred, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. My people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land. Spoil the water, poison plants and animals. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold that it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together. To stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, the winged ones, the crawling ones, the four-legged, the two-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, lakes, the earth. We are all related. Tears, like waterfalls, stream down. Tracks down my face, tracks down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Nokomis told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. We are stewards of the earth. Our spirit has not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight for its life.
An excerpt from When Time is Short by Timothy Beale. Our apparent inability to imagine our own potential extinction has kept us from making the kinds of radical economic, political, and social changes that would have been necessary to give ourselves a fighting chance at longer-term survival as a species. It's as if we think there's some invisible safety net out there. We may get pretty far down the road to self-destruction, but we'll figure things out in time. We always do. As the hero Mark Watney, played by Matt Damon, put it in The Martian, we'll just have to science the crap out of this. Which is exactly what he and his NASA colleagues keep doing throughout the movie, all the way to the final scene, in which he explains to his future space-traveling students that when all hope of survival seems lost, you can either accept that or you can get to work. You do the math. You solve one problem and you solve the next one and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. We can science our way out of anything, we seem to believe.
So last summer, I was able to visit Star Island. Has anyone been to Star Island off of New Hampshire? No? It's a UCC joint island, highly recommend. Been meaning to go for years. This is the first time I finally made it. I spent the week there with IRIS, which is the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science. Any folks know that? I would imagine that this would be a good crowd for the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science. It was wonderful to be with them because they were my people, like people who were scientists and theologians or had an interest in the two. And I was so excited to spend a week on this very small island with other, super nerds. And it was super fun. And they actually liked my paper so much that they gave me a fellowship. So not only did I get to go to Star Island, I got to go for free. So You know, how could you go wrong? The conference was entitled The Wizards of Climate Change. How can technology serve hope and justice? And we were pondering the question, can scientists and technology really fix the climate crisis? And in numerous venues and conversations around climate chaos, a regular response is that technology has the solutions. However, this response gives me great pause. And I don't know, well, I guess in my introduction, many of you know that this is what I think about all the time. I used to work for Ministry for Earth, and I teach a course on climate change and peace and spirituality, and so this is my bread and butter. And I know here that you all are quite climate conscious, right? Energy conscious, and that was part of the reason why I was asked to come around World Water Day to be here. So. It is quite clear, as you already know, that humanity is firmly living in climate crisis, or more accurately, what I call climate chaos. The numerous manifestations and downstream repercussions of this existential crisis hit hardest for the poorest and most historically oppressed societies. An oppression that is the direct result of the hegemonic practices of colonization, resource extraction, and slaughter of people and land, as well as the wonderful excuse of bringing people into modernity. Thus, people of conscience and creativity are called to imagine solutions to stem the tide of this suffering. And this call is deeply, deeply necessary. However, it must be remembered that this crisis cannot be solved with the same mindset that created it. This existential crisis calls for a paradigm shift. So I'm going to share some of the ideas I gave for this talk, which, this is a very shortened version of it, and it just came out on an open source article, and so it's Zygon, if you look up Zygon, I can email it to you if you want to read the whole thing, all 9,000 whatever words of it. So I'm definitely cutting it down. So, and as you saw on the cover of your order of service, I'm very visual, right? And when I write and think, and I need images to help me get my ideas flowing. So I thought of the three-legged stool, and I included that as a peace educator, the peace education is the seat, so it's the thing that supports or that we put ourselves upon. And the three legs are science, which provides data and understanding, technology, which provides possibilities and solutions, and spirituality, which provides grounding and the tools for holistic transformation. So when I started to think about my talk and this sermon, I was hearing my mentor, Dr. Betty Reardon, who is the founder of Peace Education, who left this plane in November at the age of 94. She taught me everything I know. And she always reminded us that before we could get into solutions or thinking about what to do next, we have to name the core problematics, as she called them. What are we up against? So I came up with 6, although I'm sure there are more, but I'm going to share 6, and I'm curious how they resonate with you. So I think the first problematic is climate misinformation and climate denial, especially the denial of anthropogenic climate change. Misinformation, and I can say this as a person who's been teaching science for a very long time, I believe has its roots in poor science education, a lack of environmental education, and even, and maybe most strongly, the fossil fuel lobby, who does a really good job to secure our addiction to carbon as they line their pockets, right? So that's my first thing. The second problematic is what I'm calling apocalyptic religious thinking. So in many Christian traditions in particular, the focus on the afterlife, the kingdom of heaven, creates a wholesale ethic of acceptable uncaring about what happens to life on the planet. Maybe that's a little strong, but you know, I'm outlining here, right? There is a rejection of this anthropogenic thinking because Scripture has foretold these things, right? And perhaps, more accurately, people think that, well, things are just happening as God planned. So folks who think that they're going to go to heaven or some idyllic location after here, then why would they care about the here and now? It's not really necessary. The third problematic is a little more challenging to articulate because I identify with it in some way, so I have to be honest, right? But what I'm calling the purely heart-centered work of earth care, or what we often think of as woo-woo spirituality. Right? I see deep, deep resonance between the spirituality that is linked to pre-Christian ideologies, but these ideas are often dismissed by organized religions and mainstream media, and even scientists and techno-progressive types, right? Because those ideas harken back to true connection, indigenous thought, right? Religious practices that are grounded in the earth, deep ecology. I mean, I have my students read an article about forest fairies, a whole group of folks who are called to serve the earth because they believe that the fairies need them. I don't want to dismiss that out of hand, but lots of people do. So we have to, think about that. There's a challenge here that the current culture that we live in is steeped in values and empirical data. And I know I'm talking to a room of Unitarian Universalists when I say that, right? We dig that. But these earth-centered spiritual folks then get ignored, or worse, they're called names, right, and dismissed. The fourth problematic, I think, is sort of the exact opposite of the previous problematic, is the hardcore scientific mindset, sort of the passage in our reading that talks about science can just solve it. We need science to give us all the answers. And I'm a person deeply steeped in the sciences, and I love doing and reading empirical research, but I've also learned that given the limits of science education in the United States and the deliberate dumbing down in many ways of our education system, anything that's deemed, and I'm going to put it in quotes because I don't think it's jargon, but other people call it jargony, will be either misunderstood or ignored, which then means scientists just get dismissed and ignored, right? I don't know if you've all watched Don't Look Up, is that the one? Right? Like, exactly, right? A perfect example of these problematics, I think, in many ways. And I also think that I'm a firm believer that we need to disseminate the data of climate issues, but when we rely on it, it often just scares people, right? And fear doesn't actually motivate folks, right? It sometimes has the opposite effect. People tending towards apathy or putting their head in the sand. So it's important, it's compelling, but I think science might have a communication problem, right, around this area. Now, the fifth problematic is, I'm sure you've all heard this one, the individual responsibility versus wholesale structural change debate that happens, right? The carbon footprint game, which many of you probably already know, introduced 30 years ago, seemed on the surface there was an invitation to think about a better mindset to align yourself, but I hope you all know that it was British Petroleum who created that carbon footprint game. And it was a targeted shift away from the fossil fuel industry, having everybody say, instead, I have to make all these really good decisions, right? And the average consumer is going to be the one who changes these things. Absolutely, we should do that. And yet, at the same time, these circular arguments, again, diffuse the notion of, is it individual? Yes. And is it the fossil fuel lobby, the big picture systemic changes, right? But if we get in the weeds about, okay. So then my sixth problematic is the whole point of why I even wrote what I wrote was the notion and the hardcore selling that technology will fix everything. I've had this conversation numerous times, and maybe you've had them with friends or colleagues who work in the field of, climate mitigation through technology. And I've even just in regular groups of folks, like I've heard somebody, even it's like a local politician say, well, everybody just needs to buy an electric car or just put solar panels on their house. And I'm like, yeah, what about the socioeconomics of those things, right? Like, there's a whole other part, like class and the pervasive poverty that exists doesn't mean people can just go out and buy an electric car or put solar panels, right? And even more importantly, it ignores the environmental and human costs of extracting the elements we need to make these shifts, right? So if we're gonna build photovoltaics, right, we have to have deep conversations of where those component parts come from and how they may be harming the folks who are bringing them, out of the earth for us. So technology does in fact have answers, but technology that remains steeped in exploitative capitalism and a colonialist mindset won't fix anything, as far as I'm concerned. Furthermore, one could argue, and I know because I have now a 21-year-old, but I raised her in a time through technology ubiquity. She's like a tech native, right? Is that the language they use for kids of a certain age, right? The pervasiveness and the harm we're now seeing of technology doing to young people's spirits and minds makes me kind of go, I don't know if I want to give technology all that much power, right? Like, I want to think about it. So, my central question that I want to finish up, well, not finish up, I'm going to keep talking, but how can a transformation from extraction to regeneration, from exploitation to reciprocity, from separation to interconnectedness be facilitated? That's what I'm wondering, right? And I believe that question needs to undergird all the thinking about climate crisis, especially if some believe that technology is the only answer. So of course, anything, right? Solutions that cut down on greenhouse gas emissions, that promote carbon capture, that assist those who are the first and most impacted, who we all know, right, are the least, right? They put the least into the world for carbon issues, but they're the ones who are feeling it the most. We should focus on. But we cannot just do this green revolution and hide it under green capitalism, which is a really funny term, right? Like this narrative of green capitalism, which to me seems just like an oxymoron, right? Is already underway, right? How many of us changed all our light bulbs to LEDs? Right? We buy the eco-friendly detergents and all those products, and anything that's got eco on it or green or something, we do it, right? And those are great. I do it myself. But the unrelenting, and I'll say, well, I think it's decidedly American, but maybe it's elsewhere. The drive for unmitigated consumption is still there. So even if you're buying green products, but you feel like you need to buy all the things, then we still have a problem of consumption. So if we don't question what is needed to transform the system and instead just replace this product with that product, we're still in the same soup, right? We're still in that, right? So if the transformative work is not done before the tech-based interventions, humans will still be wasteful, will still be mindless, will still treat resources and labor as if they are inexhaustible. Imagine for a moment all the people in the United States who already live pretty wastefully being told, go on, just keep living how you're living, do your thing, because now we're using the sun for energy, right? We're not changing anything if we do that. So this is where I think science and spirituality come together. One of my, favorite theologians / scientists is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. If you don't know him, in 1967 he wrote, and he said he was going to make the effort to lay before both the world of science and the world of religion the controversial proposition that there is and can be no real opposition between the two. Each needs the other. And I don't know about you, but for most of my life, they've sort of been separated, right? Although I realize as an Italian person, we that went sort of hand in hand, except when they excommunicated people, right? Because they were doing things that were heretical. But maybe as Unitarian Universalists, it makes a lot more sense to us, right? So how do we build this bridge? I generally focus on 3 ideas when I plan workshops or do things. One is promoting a greater connection with what we commonly call nature, which in itself is a questionable term given all the nature we've created after we obliterated the original nature, but something that is of the original world. Implementing practical changes at all levels, and then calling upon faith. And if that word is a little itchy for Unitarian Universalists, then religion or spirituality or whatever that grounds you to serve as our impetus and our practice and our sustenance. So, we have to think about reconnection. I'm sure many of you are familiar with E.O. Wilson, and he invited people so many years ago to engage in biophilia, finding your love for the natural world or the experiences that bring you love and joy and cultivate that within you, being surrounded by living organisms of all shapes, sizes, and forms. Ideally, this will facilitate a shift in our understanding that Earth is in fact a living, breathing, complex organism, an intricate web of life of which we are a part. Sounds familiar, right? Through biophilia, I said that, sorry. Now the other thing is, and Betty, as I mentioned earlier, a core practice of peace education is to examine root causes, right? How do we think about the core issues? Is it about environmental destruction? Sure, right? But is that the root cause? How are all these things interconnected? What are the roots that can be addressed? Can technology even address some root causes? Because when you look at the climate crisis, some of the root causes are colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and greed. And technology is not going to solve those things. They need to be analyzed and addressed through sociocultural, economic, and spiritual practices. It's a radical mind shift in how we live and think. So a few thoughts I had too was about maybe we practice radical inclusivity. Since we've already established that the colonizers of the world, or really what we call the developed world, whose developedness is really only due because we exploited people and lands all around the world, it behooves us, as we move into imagining alternative futures and developing solutions to this wicked problem of climate change, to practice radical inclusivity. And what I mean in this sense is I am saying that we must include the voices of those who are feeling the effects of climate change first and foremost and most devastatingly. So folks of island nations, the global south, former colonies, the poor, the disenfranchised. Indigenous societies whose worldview in almost all cases is oriented around living in reciprocal relationship with life forms rather than trying to overpower them. And also persons and communities that offer economic, social, cultural, and religious models that counter capitalism at a large scale and on a small scale, right? I also think about the phrase replicable versus scalable. So if one of our root causes that we're up against is acknowledging that we have to shift from our extreme materialistic capitalist mindset and the ills that it brings, we have to examine how we've internalized some of that. So I've even heard critiques at my institution that I work at where students would be coming up with these wonderful local ideas and a professor would say, but that's not scalable. We can't do that all over the world. And I was in a meeting once and I took a few breaths and I pushed back and said, why does it have to be scalable? Why can't it just be replicable? And why can't we just be okay with these young people coming up with these creative local what's the word I'm looking for? Not even solutions, but like out of the box ideas that create community rather than, we don't need scalable. I think of scalable and I think, money making or whatever. I think replicable means, I'm doing this cool thing. Maybe you try it in your community, and we have a whole series of like circles of us doing this interesting thing of new ways to live life. Maybe that's just my interpretation, but I throw it out there anyway. And of course, the whole point of why I gave the talk and why I'm here too is I really think part of this, the most important part, is the need for this religious and spiritual grounding. We deeply need a shift, and our spiritual selves are going to be the thing that calls us to do better. Many years ago when I started doing this work, even maybe it was fresh out of seminary or even before, I came up with the phrase, "Science provides us with the data, our faith compels us to act." And I really believe that, that all of humanity, regardless of what we define as our religious teachings or our principles, however we want to think of them, if we are all called to collectively care for life, for the planet, for place, or people, it's going to be our spiritual guidance that is going to help us do this. We need a regular spiritual practice. I mean, some of you, I'm sure, in this room, for as long as I have been, or longer, been doing activist work, and it wears you out. It's sort of designed to wear you out. But if we have a spiritual practice and spiritual grounding, we could keep going, right? We find new things that help ground us, center us, call us into relation. And I know spirituality is a moving target, but I think, for simplicity's sake, whatever is calling you to be that change maker, whatever is calling you into a space of fulfillment or grounding or I don't know. So it doesn't matter if you're a humanist or a non-theist like myself or a highly rational person, we can find that spiritual piece that calls us into doing this work and grounds us. So my parting thoughts are, how do we move forward with accountability? And I remember saying these questions at Iris too, and it led to some really great lunch and then dinner conversations about, that is a completely different way about thinking how we should move forward in this work. So while we're implementing these practices and we're analyzing them and thinking about what we could do, I want to explore or invite everyone to think about the following questions as we go along with this. One, pardon me. Am I using an intersectional lens to examine assumptions to ensure that all points of view are included? So I think of this in terms of we're looking at a technological solution. Instead of just saying, this works, what would we be like to have what I call in peace education the fly eye lens, right? Flies have these compound lenses, right? So how can I look at it from all the perspective, not just the one that might serve me the most or the one that's the most convenient, but downstream, right? How does it affect people? That's number two. That's number one. Number two, which ties into number one, who is helped, who is harmed? We often think of the helped, right? How is this helping? Oh, it's doing this for the blah, blah, blah. We often forget to then go to the flip. Who is harmed by these decisions? Number three is, have I centered the voices of those most impacted? Right, so I'm sort of drilling down here, right? We're looking at everything, helped, harmed. Have I centered those most impacted? And that might be different depending on where you're located, right? In the Albany area, maybe it's one thing. You could think locally. Or you can think about the people whose islands are actually disappearing in the Pacific, right? You choose. But am I centering those who are most impacted? And number four, have I looked to ancestors or First Nations, Indigenous, Native people for wisdom and models? And I say this, and we used to have this conversation a lot at Ministry for Earth, that I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that we co-opt Indigenous spirituality, right? As I mentioned, I'm an Italian person. I have ancestors. I have ancestors from Calabria who have all these, folk remedies, who have for years were contadini, farmers, right? Like I can learn from my own, however many generations that I can tap into. And I'm seeing all the green. I mean, think of all the amazing stuff that the Irish people have done pre-Christian, that ancestry that you can think about, right? Like, so it doesn't have to be someone else's ancestors. It's your ancestors, right? And then I say this to lead into number 5 is I was incredibly lucky in my 20s to live and work in the Pacific Northwest and teach at an intertribal school and live with colleagues who completely changed my life and my worldview. And they were the first people to introduce me to the notion of the 7 generations. So my question 5 is, am I considering 7 generations into the future, right? We notoriously build things to last for 5-10 years, right? Or maybe 50, instead of 500 years, right? Or 150 years, whatever it is. So if I buy this thing, what does it mean for my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, right? And number 6 is, what is my spiritual practice teaching me or calling me to do? So that implies that you got to have a spiritual practice, and that has to become your true north in some way. How do we keep coming back to our spiritual practice and our spiritual grounding to help guide what choices we make and the decisions we make and what we become part of? Because the work those of us committed to planetary change are called to do right now is urgent, and it's daunting, and it will not be remedied by quick fixes. If we see ourselves as members of a collective called to care for creation in a way that ensures a healthy, flourishing life for all generations to come, we must act, but we must act in a way that invites everyone into the conversation and expands our own view of what it means to care and be part of this interconnected web of life. May it be so.
Good morning. I know it's St. Patrick's Day, but there's another reason for wearing the green. And it's not about St. Patrick's Day. It's about money. Right. When I arrived in Albany from Baltimore more than 38 years ago, I was 40 years old, essentially commencing on a second life. Moving from a city of 750,000 people to one less than 1/7 the size, that was a big change. Saying goodbye to many close friends and landing in a place where I knew no one was unsettling. Leaving a place where I was active in more than a few significant causes and major organizations was a bit disorienting. I moved 330 miles north a year after I met Susan Thompson, while we were both doing volunteer work at an Adirondack Great Camp owned and operated by a not-for-profit entity. Susan was an active member of Albany UU since 1974. Some of you know that Susan died 3 years ago, March 22nd, 2021. It wasn't long after my arrival that Susan brought me here to Albany UU. I very quickly found my new community. I was warmly welcomed. People wanted to know my story and shared theirs with me. They got me involved very quickly, kind of overwhelmingly. And they got me involved in events and projects. They gave me advice about Albany, the capital region, places to go, things to see. It wasn't long before my involvement in Albany UU broadened and deepened. I helped coordinate our Habitat for Humanity house project. I served as a property manager for buildings we owned that were sitting on this site before the addition. I served on the Board of Trustees as vice president twice and president of the congregation when we were planning, developing, and financing Community Hall and the meeting rooms below. And presently I serve on the ministerial operations team. I manage the building and grounds group and assist in ushering and serve as a service associate, likely more times than you care to see my face behind this microphone. So yes, I have found a community that enabled me to once again be involved in projects and programs and be an active participant in things I care about. But this community is so much more than doing stuff. To be part of Albany Unitarian Universalist Society is to be part of a caring, compassionate group of people. When Susan became seriously ill in late 2020, we didn't have to ask for help. It was just there. Food, visits, messages, whatever was needed. Didn't have to ask. After she died, the support was there for me. Again, food, visits, telephone calls, invitations to homes for dinner, walks. And again, this past summer, when I was injured after being hit by a car as I was crossing the street in Troy, help was there. I needed not ask, it just happened. And when I introduced my new partner, Barbara, to many of you in the congregation, she was immediately accepted. No questions asked, just welcomed. We UUs, as members and friends of this church, likely have many diverse reasons for being here. For me, it is the community. I believe that responsibility to one's neighbors, one's neighborhood, and the larger commonweal is more important than individual wants and needs. It is why I care so much about Albany UU. It is my community, my place to support and be supported through all of life's experiences. But to keep this beloved community for all of us, we need to support it now more than ever. We have something special here, and especially now as we enter into a new future, we all need to acknowledge our beloved community. I am answering the Stewardship Committee's call to stretch by increasing my annual pledge by 25%. For those of you who care about this community, who are here because there is something here for you, something meaningful, I ask that you too answer the stewardship stretch and pitch in.
Thank you all for a just uplifting, wonderful service, amazing music. I have to thank you. They're fabulous. And thank you for having me here. Our benediction is a Pawnee Osage Omaha Indian song. Remember, remember the circle of the sky, the stars and the brown eagle, the supernatural winds breathing night and day from the four directions. Remember, remember the great life of the sun breathing on the earth. It lies upon the earth to bring out life upon the earth, life covering the earth. Remember, remember the sacredness of things, running streams and dwellings, the young within the nest, a hearth for sacred fire, the holy flame of fire. And with the mention of fire, we shall extinguish our chalice. The words on the screen are in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace, everyone.
We have an announcement from John Sherman.
Good morning. The annual wine and cheese tasting is coming up on Saturday, April 13th, and the committee is hosting the coffee hour this week. Wine and cheese are not simply foods that nourish us. Along with bread, fruits, nuts, they are the gifts of countless generations of loving effort by our forebears. The goal of the annual wine and cheese tasting is to nurture gratitude for all the good things in our lives by focusing on and celebrating the wonderful things that make us happy and to be alive. This year, the committee is focused on the birthplace of winemaking. Wines were first produced over 6,000 years ago in Georgia, Armenia, Romania, and Turkey, the region surrounding the Black Sea. Some of the wines were produced that we're going to be presenting at the wine tasting were produced from heritage grape varieties found nowhere else, using techniques that were developed millennia ago, such as fermenting grapes in large, and I mean a large, ceramic containers that are buried in the ground. We have worked with Mary Rizzo of the Cheese Traveler to pair those wines with her fabulous selection of cheeses and other tasty accompaniments. And this year, our resident chocolatier, Annika Pfluger, is preparing chocolates to accompany two of the wines. So the annual wine and cheese tasting event will be held again on Saturday, April 13th at 7 o'clock. And in addition to having food at the coffee hour, we'll be taking reservations, and we also have a raffle with some fabulous wines and cheeses in the raffle. So look forward to seeing you in a couple of minutes.
And before we go, we want to welcome guests and visitors to our congregation. If you are a guest or visitor and you'd like to let us know who you are and where you're from, those here in Community Hall are invited to stand or raise your hand, and Dick will bring you a microphone so everyone can hear you. And anyone on Zoom can click on the raise hand symbol, and our technician will invite you to introduce yourself.
I hear a lot about you use, and it's all good. I'm not sure whether that would be anyhow, but it's a treat for me to be here with you and sharing my sister's birthday, and as well as visitors from California. Do you want to talk? No. We're glad to have them. They made the trip all the way over to help us celebrate Kathy's birthday. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dylan. I'm just visiting from Massachusetts, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. I've been a traveler for a while. This is my first time in Albany, and I'm just very thrilled to be here with all of you.
Hi, I'm Else. This is my first time attending a Unitarian meeting. It's been really interesting and great. Yeah.
We are Lori and Jim Nearing from near Boston area, and we were members of what was then called FUSA, right? But is now being called, help me, Albany UU. We were members from 86 to 96, and then we moved away to Massachusetts for a job, and we've raised our kids there, and we're thinking of moving back.
Joined us today. To learn more about our congregation, you can stop at the welcome table and speak with Jay in the lobby, and those on Zoom can reach out through the chat window. And we have some announcements. A new grief and loss support group is starting on March 26th at 6 p.m. Contact Annie Lipinski for sign up. Mark your calendar for the Albany UU auction. Albany UU will once again be holding its online auction from May 5th to May 19th. The Albany UU auction is our largest and most important church fundraiser. To ensure a successful auction, we need donors to offer events and items. What would you like to donate? Popular items include group activities such as dinners, brunches, hikes, day trips, sing-alongs, and game nights, and services such as cleaning, decluttering, babysitting, and gardening. Auction items will be accepted online beginning Sunday, April 14th, and I know if you have any questions, you can speak to Elizabeth Berberian. The Interim Minister Search Committee is hard at work writing our application for interim ministry, which prospective UU ministers will read to decide if they want to apply to our position. We are giving the congregation a chance to improve this document by suggesting specific text to be added, removed, or replaced. A link to the document and to a survey where suggestions for text change can be submitted will be provided in the next issue of Windows. Due to the very compressed time scale over which the interim ministry process operates, the survey will be open for 1 week only. Suggestions must be submitted by Friday, March 29th, so we can incorporate changes in time to make it available to prospective ministers. If you would like an advance copy of the application for interim ministry to be emailed to you, please see Heidi Newberg after the service, and she's waving her hand back there to put your name on the list. And Heidi is our committee chair, and she can also answer questions. And I just wanted to mention, I know some of our Green Sanctuary members are going to be at the Capitol on Wednesday, mobilizing for climate, jobs, and justice. So if people have questions about that, Barb, can they speak to you? To Barb Spink, if you want to